kissed by a witch one night in the wood, and later insisted your feelings were true. The witch's promise was coming, believing he listened while laughing you flew. Leaves spotting red, yellow, brown all over the same, and the love you had found lay outside in the rain. Washed clean by the water, but nursing its pain. The witch's promise was coming, and you're looking elsewhere for your own selfish gain.
And Ian Anderson is with us. Ian Anderson, now, I saw that on YouTube. I dialed that up on YouTube recently, which is promising. You're doing it on Top of the Pops. And these young gals of about 12 and 13 in the Laura Ashley frocks don't quite know what's going on. And you seem to be purposely intimidating them.
Well, and now that they're in their late 50s, they probably still have no idea. It's very confusing because we were one of those bands that didn't really belong on Top of the Pops. There was this curious little moment where bands like The Nice and early Fleetwood Mac and Jethro Tull were actually on Top of the Pops, but it was only because they couldn't ignore the fact that we were actually selling records, even though we weren't singles bands.
They introduced an album spot, a very little known and brief album spot on Top of the Pops, and they, some might say ill-advisedly, launched it with Yes doing 9 minutes of Yours Is No Disgrace with John Anderson with the big furry Yeti boots and all of that, and I think they were trying to, you know, bring the two halves of both pop and what was happening in the underground then together. But it certainly was an uncompromising performance by yourself and the band, who said, hey kids, you know, it's a good tune, and it always was and always is, which is promised. But it's on YouTube if you care to have a look at your past.
Oh, it's just promises turning, so don't you wait up for him trying to be late.
Why are we gathered here, Ian Anderson? I know, but it's best coming from you. We're gathered because you're doing extraordinary performance in the not too far future. What are you doing?
Well, we have a show coming up in the, I think on the 3rd of May at the Barbican Theatre, part of a fluty kind of a day. It's in aid of one of the flute associations called Flutewise, who basically are one of the bodies that really kind of energise young players from school age on to their early professional years of, you know, and bring to them not just the flute as a classical instrument, but they're a bit broader than that. So they brought me in as a circus turn to do the evening concerts.
You say that, but it's and again, it wasn't your original instrument of choice. I mean, going back to being in groups like the Blades.
I was a frantic strummer.
Yeah.
I was a keen strummer of the guitar. Burt Whedon's Play in a Day. Yeah.
Quite right, yeah.
I read that from page 1 all the way through to page 2 before I realised it was getting a bit difficult. After I got the status quo chords, I didn't need any more.
That'll do that. But why were you attracted to the flute? Because even at the height of kind of your incredible string bands and the whole influence of madrigal upon the English folk sing and all that, there were very few flautists, and it's a difficult instrument, I always thought, to drop into the rock scene and stuff. Plus, being a vocalist, you know, you certainly have to belt up and blow and all of that. Well, why did you gravitate towards the flute?
Well, basically, when I started playing, it was there wasn't really anybody else doing it, using it as a lead instrument in a kind of more rocky or whatever context. So there were folk flautists and there were jazz flautists, and there were, of course, classical music flute players, but not in the world of rock music, not in more aggressive stuff. So there was nobody else doing it, and since I wasn't ever going to be in the the Peter Green or Eric Clapton or Jeff Beck league as a guitar player, seems appropriate to be a bigger fish in a very much smaller pool. So and flutes offered an opportunity.
And your fellow band members, did they not say, Okay, Ian, how about the saxophone? Because that has rock and roll, precedent.
It's kind of an obvious, but you're right, it was not a particularly popular career move at the time. Both our managers and indeed some of the people who, ran the clubs and so on that we were trying to play in, they saw the flute as being a very alien instrument in the context of a blues band, which was what we were.
Yeah.
So it took a little persuading to... and perseverance, because when I started playing, I could hardly play anything at all. The first piece I ever played was that Serenade to a Cuckoo.
Well, and I noticed you're not out and out wince, but plainly you feel, well, that's beginners, not bad for a beginner, or a bit of juvenilia.
Yeah.
Plainly it's, you'd only been playing about a year, hadn't you, when you came to record this?
Well, actually less than that, probably about 7 or 8 months, in fact, since...
Pretty ambitious, being as a...
Yeah, but, if you walk on stage with a flute... and you're in a kind of a loud blues band, and I mean you've got to be prepared to learn quickly. Otherwise, people are just going to laugh at you. But it's a girly instrument in the minds of a lot of people.
But this was a Roland Kirk piece, yes. And so again, there's ambition. You weren't just going to come on and give them, some kind of something they'd recognise. Even it was, and Jethro Tull, as you said at the time, weren't the Jethro Tull they were 5 years later. This was when you were still almost foot to the floor, bluesing.
Yeah, I mean, it was a kind of jazzy sort of blues that we were doing. There was something a little more syncopated and groovy about it. It wasn't just kind of rock-oriented blues. But, the flute was not too far away from that world. But, as you say, saxophone was usually the instrument of choice if you wanted to play woodwind. So I wasn't alone as a flautist. I didn't invent flute playing in the context of rock music. But
you're certainly
I was one of the very few. And,
you're certainly the most associated with it.
The noisiest of the small bunch, yes.
Yourself and Thijs Van Leer for a while, I think, had something of a...
That's right.
It would have been in Melody Makers, the multi-instrumentalist end of the year thing. I think you and Thijs...
The catch-all category, yes.
Yourself and Thijs Van Leer, I believe, had a sort of a relay going for a few years. But how much did it cost? And when you first bought it, was it in a shop window second-hand, or one of them, your first flute?
It wasn't in a shop window second-hand. It was hanging on... I traded in a Fender Stratocaster, a 1960s Fender Strat.
Well done.
Which has some form, did that Fender Strat. It had been the working man's tool of a certain Lemmy, who was the rhythm guitarist with Reverend Black and the Rocking Vicars.
Oh,
and he got hard up and sold his Fender Strat. Yeah. And I acquired it at some point second-hand, very second-hand, and then a year or two later traded it in for a flute. And this would be worth 30,000 pounds today. Yeah. Even leaving aside the Lemmy heritage, but the Lemmy provenance.
Just the same, I'm not sure we will attend to the.
And the flute was 30 quid.
Was it?
Yeah. So I mean, it looked like I got a pretty rotten deal, but on the other hand, I think I did rather well.
I just passed by a shop today, and all they sell is flutes. Yeah. And I stopped, and all Flutes Plus, you must know it. I'm on my way there after leaving this very studio to pick up my flute, which has been slightly modified so I can play it with this splint on my finger.
Tell us about that, because it seems the history of big events are always, even Led Zeppelin's reunion the other year, Jimmy Page broke a finger a month before, and here you are in a splint.
And coincidentally, I shall be seeing the very same specialist who fixed Jimmy's finger. Not that I only knew this by looking through the internet and finding a guy who would try and sort this out when I got back from the last tour.
What did you do?
Well, it's a really exciting story.
No, I'm all for it. No, I know injuries we do a lot on.
I was putting out the cat in the middle of the night.
You don't.
I really was on the eve of departure to Minsk in Belarus.
Now we're getting
putting the cat out, and the cat suddenly decided it didn't want to go out after all. Shot back, between my legs, as it were, and I went down to grab it, forgetting that I was standing on the stairs. So, of course, where my feet were was not where my hands ended up. My hands ended up on the higher step behind me, having jabbed my finger right in. So it ripped the tendon off the last joint of the finger, along with a little bit of bone. And so I was left with this
and you went,
wobbly
hell.
Thing. Yes. I was getting
silly old cat
jumping on a plane to go off to do a tour. So it was.
And what have you done? You've torn tendons.
Yeah. Ripped the tendon off, but it will sort of, kind of, more or less. I'll get most of the movement back in about 5-6 weeks when the splint comes off. Yeah. So they promised me.
But in the meantime, you've had your flute modified.
In the meantime, I can play the flute anyway. I've even managed to sort of do a Django Reinhardt and relearn a lot of guitar stuff using just two fingers, which to begin with, seemed a preposterous idea. But I have actually managed to play quite a few of the pieces that I usually play on guitar, just using, essentially 2 fingers. Not very well, and sometimes 3 or 4 notes to the chord instead of 6 notes. But
people forget.
But
Jerry Garcia had one missing, didn't he? He famously only, but
that's right.
Not suggesting for a second you
Tony Iommi had an industrial accident without which he would probably never have played the way he does, just as Django Reinhardt, with only 2 fingers, had to evolve a style of playing. So sometimes, these disasters turn into a kind of personal triumph where you make use of your limited resources.
You said Tony Iommi there with the, and of course he was just for one day a member of Jethro Tull, was he?
We got together for a little blow. Wasn't really a member of the band, but he did come and join in on the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus as a sort of hired hand just to mime guitar. He wasn't actually plugged into anything.
Oh, he wasn't? Okay.
I was live, the other guys were on tape, because we didn't actually have a guitar player at the time.
Oh, okay. Well, I've sat with people who said you can tell his distinctive style on that particular... So I now have the drop on them when it actually turns up. The world music is what you seem to be associated more and more. I often see you'd have a strap down a page in a Sunday magazine, what I'm listening to currently, and it all seems extraordinarily world music. It doesn't seem
it always was. You see, when I was a teenager, I was always listening to weird stuff. I was never really into rock and roll and kind of the peer group kind of music. I was always interested in something else, and it was folk music and classical music and the folk music of many different parts of the world. So during the time that I was really beginning to play professionally, I was listening to a lot of stuff from the Middle East and particularly from India. And recently I was on tour with Anushka Shankar in India, and we did a bunch of dates in India in December, and which was really a big challenge, writing music for us to play together, which... writing music for sitar is quite a big deal.
How does that happen? I mean, you can understand if you were part of an RAF family travelling the world or whatever, but what was indoors that suddenly made you gravitate towards such, on the surface looks like extremes of music?
Well, it's challenging to try, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't work too well. I mean, things with Anushka went well because she's young and fleet of finger. I mean, you just can't believe how fast that little girl's fingers move on a sitar. I mean, her dad obviously is the master, and indeed still is. And she's actually, he strangely, having decided that he was going to retire last year, has actually decided to come back and do a few more shows this year. So she was looking to be let off the leash last year, but she's now got to play more shows with Dad this year. So
and what have you learned?
I, as the younger man, won't get a look in.
Oh, I see. You're good enough to say, well, I'm perhaps the best known flautist, but in the world of rock, which from your tone it seems to be, which is nothing to do with the serious players, but you obviously are one of the best, full stop, I should imagine, and come a long way from this was. But what if you had to say what you've learned about the instrument, what you've learned to love about the instrument, why you say I have no regrets about picking up the flute? You plainly don't.
Well, I think that there are 2 kinds of musicians. There are those that get into their professional stride and think that they've got to the point where they know music, and that applies in the world of pop music, rock music, classical music, whatever. They think they've done it, they've done their hard work, they're learning, they're training, and now they know it. Now they just go out and carry on doing that stuff for the rest of their lives. Then there's the other guys who just are very restless souls, who are always trying to find some new thing, trying to find another angle. And there are people like Ravi Shankar, for example, who won't just rest on his laurels. He, even at the age of 89 or whatever he is now, is still trying some different stuff. He's just written a new concerto for sitar and orchestra, which is premiering now. So being that kind of a guy, when you realise you don't really know your instrument completely, you never should stop learning. Every day there's got to be a new, wow, I never knew how to do that before. And you get that sometimes by playing with younger people, like Ravi playing with his daughter, or me playing with other younger musicians sometimes. I always think they can teach me something, even though they may be relatively new to the game.
And of course, something like the flute, of course, becomes somebody who, as of your age, you can, it suits you rather than, you know, being Richie Blackmore playing Smoke on the Water over and over again. It does seem an instrument that does, as you grow older, it becomes mature with you. You can adapt music to it. As you say, if you'd have stayed with your Stratocaster, 30 grand though it might have been, or be,
I would be very much an also-ran as a guitar player, because they were Tanner Penny and many of them, I mean, brilliant players. I was born, fortunately, at a time when we were part of that evolution of the of contemporary music from the days of mono through to this glorious stereo revolution, which more or less coincided with that huge development in British music.
Sure.
I'm a passionate supporter of British music. You know, as a little country, we produced at least half of the best music ever made in the world in the last 50 years.
And I've got to say, that's something that blows throughout Jethro Tull. It waxes and wanes, but it certainly blows throughout Jethro Tull, the tradition, the kind of the balladeer mentality, the madrigal thing, and certainly the timbre of your own voice always suited that. And something like Thick as a Brick, which, if you don't mind me saying, I think Thick as a Brick is one of the most extraordinary and important pieces of music of not just the rock period, but I don't know if coincidentally, I know it was made under chaotic circumstances in Arches in Bermondsey and things like this, but it just seems, lyrically, it seemed to sum up a certain post-war story, and it made me reading that into it.
Yeah, but it's certainly bringing together that sort of surreal element of British humour with the kind of expanding musicality of the age. But it was a spoof album. It was a send-up of the concept album genre, and we tried to make it sit uneasily between being a bit of serious music and also being a bit of a spoof. You know?
Yeah, certainly.
So the whole thing was, I mean, the Japanese did not get it. They didn't get the humour part at all. They just sat straight-faced through it.
But that said, and to say, well, I think maybe coincidentally, as I say, I don't often toss the word important around, because people who are certainly in the rock genre tend to shy away from it and tend to, quite rightly be self-effacing. But I think as lyrically, it is an extraordinary piece of work that sets it apart. Just let me play.
Can't make you think. Your sperm's in the gutter, your love's in the sink. So you ride yourselves over the fields, and you make all your animal deals, and your wise men don't know how it feels to be thick as a brick. And the sandcastle virtues are all swept away in the tidal destruction, the moral malaise. The elastic retreat swings the close of play as the last wave uncovers the newfangled way. But your new shoes are worn at the heels, and your suntans rapidly feel, and your wise men don't know how it feels to be thick as a brick. And the love that I feel is so far away. I'm a bad dream that I just had today. And you shake your head. You said it's a shame.
When you hear something like that and played Witch's Promise at the top, and do you see the recording studio? Do you hear the faults, or do you just is it just looking into a mirror? What's it like?
It is the recording studio. You actually really do take yourself back to the moment of trying to put this thing together. And I'm thinking, what guitar was I playing then? And it's suddenly you get drawn into the mechanics of putting it together. It's very hard for me to sit and listen to it just as a piece of entertainment. If I listen, I'm drawn back to the mechanics of trying to put that together in the studio and the technical stuff. suddenly, whoa, there's no compression on that guitar there. That's too much.
You see, from our, if I might speak for a listenership, from our point of view, it's various bedrooms along the way that's been in various, and just as part of a soundtrack of, certainly some of my ages, said to you on the iPod, and I play that regularly and all the time, and it annoys the hell out of us when it's put together, and it will sound pompous here, but put together with, I don't know, Deep Purple with the Royal Philharmonic. It is not. It's a piece that stands alone like very few do. Pink Floyd kind of pulled it off because it's very difficult to carry that off. It's called progressive, I know, people say that, but that's sometimes down to be faint praise, and I just think probably people don't tell you enough how good a piece of music that is.
Well, thank you very much, Danny. It's very kind of you.
It was number 1 in the States, of course. It wasn't like it's no secret. I'm not breaking any...
It did actually really... It was the record that put Jethro Tull into the sort of really international kind of recognition. We'd had a big success with Aqualung, but it wasn't instant. It took a while to catch on everywhere. But Thick as a Brick is the one that kind of suddenly we were doing pretty well everywhere. Yeah. It's still a little bit of a signature tune today, and one of those songs that I did manage to play with 2 fingers during the last few concerts in Finland or wherever I was last week. So
we were speaking before about the packaging, if that's not too dry a word. The covers of Jethro Tull albums always had something going on. Stand up, you opened it up, and like a 3D card, out came the band to meet you. And Thick as a Brick famously is the newspaper.
That's right, and it is indeed the 40th anniversary of the Stand Up album released this year. And curiously, we said just on the last week when we were on tour, we thought, wouldn't it be good if we actually played all of that? Because we play quite a lot of the songs from it here and there.
I love that concept when people do that.
Let us do the whole album during the shows in the summer.
For too long, there's been a standoff, I always think, between musicians and the audience, where you're throwing a handful of hits and saying, "Now here's something," and we know how that works. And as a member of the audience, even I think musicians think, "Oh, we should play this or whatever." But I love the fairly modern concept of people playing entire albums.
Yeah, but no reason why they should. So we might well give that a crack. You get to hear all of Stand Up with you, see Jethro Tull playing in Europe somewhere this summer, and we'll toss in Smoke on the Water as an encore. That's good value.
You'll get voices from the dark there. Of course, we're here to promote it is the 3rd, as you said. It's the 3rd of May, Sunday at the Barbican, the Flute-Wise Live, and that sounds almost like a part lecture, part music. What form does it take?
Well, there's a lot of stuff going on in the Barbican on that day, various kind of trade things, masterclasses, things going on, peripheral things to do with all the flute students who will hopefully be gravitating to that. And the show that I'm doing in the evening, which is the actual concert, is Jethro Tull music, some solo stuff, and then I have some guests from the alternative worlds of flute playing. I have an Indian flautist, I have a young classical flautist, and I have one of the learned professors of music at the Guildhall, who's a very accomplished contemporary classical musician. And so we get to hear sort of the idea is to present to an audience that the flute comes with all these different kind of pedigrees from different places, and so we'll try and highlight a little bit of what it does and what it can do, and some of the things that I guess music teachers will not want their students to really learn. But I think it's important to show that some of the stuff that their teachers wouldn't teach them. I think you've got to break a few rules, and say, well, this is an example of something musically that you probably won't find in the How to Play the Flute Volume 3.
Because you pretty much groped your way forwards.
I'm self-taught, so I just fumble my way through and break rules, and that was the good thing about learning the flute. No one gave me a lesson. I just figured it out for myself.
Listen, you could have gone on and been a pop star, you know that. You threw it all away. You could have been David Essex if you'd have played your cards right. No offence to David Essex. How many people, before we wrap up, over the years, do people still call you Jethro? Does anyone actually say, "You're old Jethro Tull, aren't you"?
I get it mostly when people are looking for money. When they're soliciting donations for some charity auction.
Dear Mr. Tull.
Yeah, it is exactly that.
No,
I mean, they get a little bit more credibility than those that just say, "Dear sir, please send the money."
Yeah, exactly.
But dear Jethro kind of is,
I'll put a bloke who stood on one leg. What do you got over there, Bailyn Leonard?
Yep, so it's Flute-Wise Live. It's a whole day of flute-related activity. naivety, and Ian Anderson takes the stage at 7:30 p.m. It's on Sunday, the 3rd of May, Barbican Hall, London. Tickets start at £17.50. The box office is 0207-638-8891. That's 0207-638-8891. Or you can go onto the website, which is jethrotull.com.
There you go. Thank you very much indeed, Ian. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed.